You're welcome back. Now, of course, later this morning, the Finance Minister will seek Parliament's approval to spend more than the approved 78 billion Ghana cedis during the presentation of the 2019 mid-year budget review. Now, a statement from the Finance Ministry reveals that this presentation will see an upward revision of the 2019 appropriation ceiling. And of course, its underlying measures. And this is in order to achieve the objectives of the 2019 budget. And you remember the theme was to expand the economy and increase jobs. Well, ahead of the presentation, Joy Business's George Riafe has been speaking to one of the few people who has been sitting around the table probably all weekend trying to put it together. The Deputy Finance Minister, Kweku Kwarteng. Let's check out what they talked about.
It's a media review, so we are required by law to provide updates on how the budget that we got approval to implement has been implemented. So first and foremost, it's an update. We're giving an update to the country. But we are also going to take advantage of that opportunity to request Parliament to give us approval for additional expenditures. And then we can also expect some revenue measures. Already, the Minister for Finance has indicated that the luxury vehicles levy would see some important changes. And so, broadly, we're going to see not that many, but we're going to see some revenue measures. And then we know energy has become very topical, and so we would also be addressing some of the concerns of the energy sector and mount a bold effort to deal with this problem that has been with us for so long. But we will do all these with the objective of deepening the theme for the budget that we are now implementing, namely stronger economy for jobs and prosperity.
You talked about an update and another, so just let me help my listeners and viewers to appreciate. So he would do a review of what has happened and then also tell us what we should expect for the next half of the year, right?
Yes, essentially that is the update we will be providing. But as I indicated, we will be taking advantage of that opportunity to also seek approval to do things that would help deepen even the budget that we got approval to implement. That is the 2019 budget statement.
The minister has spoken about it being focusing on revenue and revenue mobilization and all. What is it about revenue? We know that revenue, we are having challenges with revenue mobilization as in meeting the target. What will be this mid-year review doing to deal with the revenue problem?
Well, I would not attempt to go into what the minister will be presenting, except to say that largely we're looking at compliance, we're looking at reforms of our revenue mobilization institutions and arrangements. As you would recall, in the 2019 budget statement, we did make some commitments on revenue mobilization. We will be giving an update and also proposing some new ideas as a way of ensuring that the country is able to raise the kind of resources it needs to finance improvements in the lives of our people. But that is particularly necessary if you consider the point I made earlier, that we will also be seeking parliamentary approval to do additional expenditures.
Let's still focus on revenue, and good that is your baby. Looking at the way revenue are going, is it about compliance that we have to tweak, or maybe it's about, again, some taxes were not well placed, so we're going to look at that in placing these taxes well, or maybe realignment, or even introducing some new ones and all the rest, intend to do the real problem again, as I asked?
Well, it's a bit of a couple of the things you have mentioned.
So new ones would happen, some new tax measures will be introduced?
Well, yes, there will be new measures, but as I have indicated, they have been carefully considered, but they won't be as comprehensive as perhaps in the past tax measures have been. These are very specific interventions to achieve specific fiscal objectives. And so, yes, there will be a few revenue measures, some of which we have already hinted. For instance, that there would be some modifications to the luxury vehicles levy. We have listened over the period that we have implemented it. We have listened to the stakeholders. We have listened to those who have expressed concerns one way or the other. And having made our minds what we think is the best responses to the feedback we have got, we consider that this media review is an opportunity to introduce those changes. So yes, there would be some revenue measures, but overall, our objective, as I indicated, is to deepen the actual objectives of the 2019 budget, namely to promote economic growth, to generate jobs, and to promote prosperity. When you bear that in mind, it gives you some sense of even the kind of measures, revenue, for instance, that you'd want to introduce. If, as we indicated, we're looking to grow the economy, then you introduce revenue measures very cautiously, and you would see on Monday that the measures that we introduce are very creative measures, but some of them are just to respond to concerns that we have heard in respect of some of the measures that were introduced last year.
You've had 6 months of the year already. Some would ask that from what you've seen with revenue, is it a problem about compliance, or again, these new tax measures are really needed? Because some are saying that if already the existing measures haven't gotten what you need, would new ones help? And maybe it's just about compliance.
Yes, some of the interventions are compliance interventions. And as we indicated in the 2019 budget statement itself, the focus of government's revenue mobilization strategy is to deepen compliance rather than to increase more taxes. So you would see that the interventions, of course there are new measures, but our efforts generally in revenue mobilization are generally on compliance. So you're right, we've considered that we must get everybody to contribute to domestic revenue and not continue to impose taxes that would incident on a few. So even where we are introducing new measures, we consider them carefully to ensure that you do not burden people those who have traditionally been carrying the tax burden. So we agree with you on that. And as you would see, not just in this media review, but going forward, there would be a lot of effort by way of compliance. And that is why we're seeing some of the reforms that we got approval for in the 2019 budget. Those reforms ultimately are to lead to improved capacity to mobilize more domestic revenue.
Well, no, but some would say that this government came on the proposal or policy or mantra about less taxation and more production. Politically, I mean, economists will say political economy and all the rest. Do you think that it will be a little bit of a challenge for you, where people will think that this government talked about less taxation, more production? If you're having these new tax measures, politically, that might not be good for you.
Well, if you take our tax measures in total, from the beginning of this administration, early 2017, and the many tax lines we abolished in 2017, the reliefs we introduced even in 2018, at the same time that we were introducing some measures in the media review. If you take all of them as a whole, you will be left in no doubt that it's a government that ultimately is looking to reduce the tax burden as a way of promoting growth. But we're conscious of the fact that unless you keep the macroeconomy stable, your growth would face challenges. And so wherever we have found it necessary, we take steps to do whatever it takes to keep the economy stable so that businesses can thrive. So it is consistent with our objective to shift the emphasis from taxation to production. But as I said, we are minded, we would not for political reasons say because we said we're moving from taxation to production, even where some specific tax interventions are necessary, we will shy away from it because people might say, might read politics.
Suicidal, some would say.
I think
politically.
I think we are guided more by what is needed now, but what is needed now cannot be inconsistent with our broad economic management strategy, that ultimately you want businesses to grow. So even where we're introducing tax measures, we're introducing them in such a way that its overall impact on growth is positive rather than negative. So in response to your answer, what I would say that if you would do a comprehensive review of all the tax measures we have introduced, both reliefs and additional tax impositions, you will be left in no doubt that indeed we have moved away from more taxes to less taxes. But at the risk of repeating myself, that should not be interpreted to mean that even where clearly certain tax measures are needed, if not for anything at all, for the purposes of shaping behavior, where you need to make specific interventions to create the kind of fiscal stability that your businesses need to grow, you shy away simply because people who are minded to discuss politics would say you're going back on your word. We want to do what is right rather than what...
You don't think that would be the concern for many people? The political economy bit as well?
Well, the political economy bit is a government that promises to manage an economy to generate jobs and prosperity. And you do so. If you don't deliver on that commitment, that ultimately you want to grow business, and you can look at the economic growth figures. Clearly, the evidence is clear. It's there. So that is what you should look at to judge whether the basket and the mix of economic management strategies are producing desirable outcomes. So that, for me, is the real point about political economy, that you said you would achieve those improvements in your economy that should translate into improvements in the lives of people, and you're doing it. If you're not doing it, and you think that somehow, by some political considerations, you would appear better in the eyes of the people, I would say that would be short-term. Ultimately, if the strategies are wrong, you'll be exposed. But I think so far our strategies are right, and I am happy to see some of the positive outcomes that we are registering. In this media review, we will be looking to deepen some of those strategies in order to achieve even better outcomes for the economy.
You've spoken heavily, and even ministers have spoken heavily about this luxury tax thing, about reviewed. Are we still going? Is it still going to be, or is it going to be scrapped? Since you've spoken heavily about that one,
I think government was clear when Minister for Finance spoke that we will not scrap the tax. That is not our objective. Our review shows that it is still a helpful revenue intervention. It has many positive sides, but the fact that a policy is good does not mean it cannot be fine-tuned or cannot be made better. So having listened to the various stakeholders and the people whose businesses have been affected, and I have been in meetings with people who say, we used to trade in big engines, and because of your policy, people are moving away from big engine vehicles, and therefore our businesses are suffering. We will need to listen carefully to those people, balance it against the positive outcomes of having smaller engines and make some decision. Again, you would have heard people say we have machinery and vehicles that we use for economic activity, but because they are not yellow plated, they are not exempted by the law, and therefore we feel penalized even though we're doing business with these vehicles. I mean, some of these concerns have been listened to carefully, and the changes we're bringing to that levy are intended to make the taxes, to make that levy even more attractive to the wider population, and to ensure that we achieve the objectives for which it was set up.
Using them, would you describe these tax measures as business friendly?
They are. They are to the extent that they are intended to stabilize, as I indicated, the fiscals. A government that allows the fiscals to deteriorate, you would then have to run to the IMF, and then you don't achieve economic growth. So if you really want to help business, you need to do those responsible things that would keep the economy stable. Your exchange rate should be stable, so people who are importing raw material and who are importing machinery to promote growth would not suffer adversely. You would want your inflation to be under control so businesses can plan. You would want your interest rates to be stable and low so investments can happen. You need to take all those things together to see whether you are friendly to business or not. Our view, and it is a carefully considered view, is that the mix of interventions that we introduced in the 2019 budget statement and what the updates we're going to give in the media review, and the interventions that you would see, the limited interventions you will see in this media review, would give you the best outcomes in terms of promoting a good business environment.
Are you optimistic also that this broad tax measures, that policy revenue measures, would ensure that you would end this year on a positive note in terms of raising the required revenue to support your expenditure?
That is our expectation. Even though revenue so far has lagged behind targets, we're confident that we would deliver the target. We're confident. But I have to indicate that going forward, our focus is not even just to deliver the target this year. Our focus is to begin to shape the revenue mobilization culture, both on the revenue administration side, but also on the side of taxpayers, so that we have greater compliance, there's greater accountability on the part of our revenue mobilization institutions and officers. Those reforms are more important to us than the immediate objective of achieving our targets. But we're confident we will achieve the target. And as you would see in the figures of the media review, we have considered all these. You
are a minister in charge of revenue. I mean, when we hear the concerns about revenue, you feel under pressure that you've not, the president to say, I've delivered things, deliver the numbers or deliver the revenue for the minister to meet all the expenditure commitments and all the rest?
Yes, we do feel the pressure.
Do you feel under pressure as in charge of revenue?
I do, and I think many of my colleagues in government do feel the pressure, but the pressure it's not coming from the commentary on revenue. The pressure is coming from the people that put us in government, who have high expectations, who want infrastructure, who want the roads, who want improvements in their lives, who love your social interventions and are calling for more. When you listen to those legitimate concerns from the citizenry, and you know that the only way you can do that is to raise the revenue, then the pressure comes. Yes, But we welcome that kind of pressure. We are putting government to deal with challenges, and we think we have what it takes to deal with those challenges. So, yes, we feel the pressure, and we just have to keep the focus and to ensure we do the right things. And ultimately, I think we will deliver what is possible to deliver to Ghanaians by raising the revenue and doing the things that people want.
You are talking about a supplementary budget. Why supplementary budget?
Well, supplementary because, as I mentioned when the conversation started, we will be going to Parliament for approval to do additional expenditures. And because appropriation limited how much we were to spend, and you now want to do additional for a reason.
Fascinating. Yeah, bit of a sneak peek there as Kweku Kwarteng tries to explain the thinking behind what we're about to hear when the finance minister speaks in a couple of hours in Parliament. All right, now I still have my guests in the studio. Henry Chirma is the co-founder of iWatch Africa. He's here with William Kofi Owusu Demitiana. He's a tax consultant. And already we've learned so much from our conversation with them. Let's learn a bit more. So you've heard Kweku Kwarteng and yeah, giving us a bit of an idea of what we're likely to hear. So luxury tax, we're thinking that's probably gone. But let me start with you on this, William. Has Kweku Kwarteng let enough of the cat out of the bag? And from what you've heard, are we looking at a mid-year review that's going to actually make things better? Or are we likely to still hear some surprises in a few hours' time?
I will still say that we will hear some surprises. Until the minister stands to read it out for us to know, we could always expect something. We've had rumors that there may be some variation of taxes that are put on data because people now don't use a lot of voice calls, so the communication service tax is not as efficient as we thought it would be. There will be some reform in that area. As you said, the luxury vehicle levy, either there's a total abolition or there may be the need to review and then, as it were, either broaden the base and reduce the amount so that it can rake in more revenue. We've also heard that, as the Deputy Finance Minister in charge of revenue, Kweku Kwarteng, said, government will want to spend more. And if government is spending more, then there's a need for government to be able to raise more revenue than the projected in order not to slip off the band that we have. Now, I think in the budget, it was 4.2% of GDP that was supposed to be the deficit. It's possible that in the revised estimate, and this will make call for a supplementary budget to be laid before Parliament, we might either go a little bit above the deficit or we may see an increase in revenue expected. And from the data we've had from BOG, the first 5 months we are underperforming by about 3 billion. And so there may be additional measures to rake in revenue. I've always said that government planned that we're going to get tax revenue of about 45.4 billion from two things: improved tax compliance and reform of the revenue agency. We have seen a number of measures being rolled out, but we've not rolled out all of it on tax compliance. We've not seen so much reform in the revenue agency. All we've seen is kind of like reshuffling of certain people in certain positions. But reform goes just beyond moving the heads of institutions. It may look at the institution itself to find out whether it is efficient. Some people have argued that we need to go back to what we call a regional office concept or zoning Ghana, because as of now we have just one commissioner in charge of domestic tax revenue. Almost everything hits its desk. There's a possibility that we can zone Ghana into 4 and have someone being very close to the people and taking decisions that can bring us the revenue. These are all things people have been throwing about.
But I mean, domestic revenue hasn't historically been the big problem, has it?
It hasn't. And again, from the BOG statement, you see that domestic revenue always appears to meet or even exceed its target. As the governor said, we are not meeting our revenue targets because of international trade taxes. And it's attributable to two things. One, When we announced the reduction in benchmark values, in the short term, it was going to lead to a decrease in revenue.
Yeah.
That is without doubt. But in the medium to long term, the plan was to get people to patronize Ghana's ports and stop the smuggling, which will bring in revenue. Number two, we have a lot of exemptions in the system. I know that there's a bill in Parliament called the Exemption Bill, which is seeking to rationalize all the exemptions that we have within our tax laws and other laws in Ghana. If we implement these things well, we can improve the international trade taxes and be able to meet our revenue targets. And so these are the key things that we'll be looking at as government comes to give us the media review of the budget. And it is hoped that we would have some of these things come in and then help us.
Okay. Well, speaking of the exemptions bill, our sources tell us that Kweku Kwate has been very instrumental in that particular bill. But Henry, let me ask you this. 3 billion. We're underperforming by about 3 billion. Yes, it's a large figure. But if we weren't spending so much, it wouldn't be such a headache. So tell me, what is the big burden on our expenditure? Where have we spent so much money that we've ended up digging this hole that makes some of these reforms, including possibly more taxes, necessary?
Okay, thank you very much. I think if you look at our expenses, significant portion goes into compensation of employees, and the second one is the interest payments. And these are recurrent expenditures, which in my opinion really do not add anything to growth significantly. So what we are doing is that we are mobilizing borrowing to spend on consumption, and in itself is a problematic one. So capital expenditure, which is supposed to be the significant portion of our budget, is rather the lowest portion of our budget. And if you listen to the minister, clearly government is going to embark on expansionary fiscal policy by increasing expenditure. At the same time, to meet it, you have to increase revenues. Within the confines of the Fiscal Responsibility Act, where you're not supposed to go beyond 5% of deficit, I wonder the room that government has. And like you said, the budget had envisioned 4.2% of GDP, or deficit of GDP. So you have slightly a very small window in there. I do not know how government intends to accelerate expenditure within that the confines of the Fiscal Responsibility Act. So clearly government wants to embark on expansionary fiscal policy, ensure that the roads that are being talked about are fixed, the health facilities that we talk about are fixed, and it will come at a cost. The deficits would widen, and how do we address some of the challenges that will come with such policies? What all of us are waiting to hear from the minister.
All right. I mean, you've mentioned salaries and revenue. Is there anything else that is quite a burden on us?
So if you look at the budget statement, page 76, so the first item is compensation of employees.
Yeah.
The second biggest item is interest payments. And the third largest item is grants to government units. Okay. So we're talking about DACF, Get Fund and what have you. Yeah. Then look, the fourth one is capital expenditure. It should have been the reverse. Yeah. It should have been the reverse. And this is where the challenge is. So if you look at the IMF report of March, it is actually raising issues on interest payments, which in itself is going to hurt us. And it's rather the reason why Ghana is classified as a debt distressed country.
It's because of the interest.
The interest cost.
18.6 billion Ghana cedis.
Which is about 25.4% of total expenditure, appropriated expenditure for 2019. It's quite significant.
Anything there on our expenditure on energy?
So the budget had put in some numbers for energy expenses, and I think that is an area this budget probably would have to take a very critical look, the IPPs and their implications for government.
You mean the review?
Yes, the review has to really take care of that one.
All right. Well, let's have a quick look at some of the highlights of the 2019 budget, remind ourselves of where we said we would be going, and see how far along the path we are to get there. Yeah, so that's the big picture. That's what budget said when it was read in 2019. But let's figure out how this now affects you and me, you know, ordinary Ghanaians. Artisans and spare parts dealers at Swami magazine, they say that they expect government to address the foreigners. They say any economic policy short of that will mean little to them. The traders have, since the beginning of the year, been clashing, especially with Nigerian traders, who they describe as intruders. Nane Aljima visited the Swami magazine industrial enclave to interact with business operators. Here's his report.
In June, Ghanaian spare parts dealers at Swam magazine went rampage, closing down shops owned by foreigners. They acknowledge interventions like reduction in import duties came in handy, but they want trade issues resolved. According to the spare parts dealers, foreigners have invaded the retail business space, selling what they claim are substandard goods. Their counterparts in Accra followed with similar actions. Reduction in import duties, which they received with much excitement, failed to achieve expected results, partly because of the foreigners in the market. They expect government to find solutions to such issues for successful implementation of other policies intended in the budget.
We want them to look at the trade issues. The Nigerians are our brothers, but the laws must be applied. All these issues must be resolved before we can reap full benefits of government interventions.
They set up as wholesalers and retail. Later, after selling to us in bulk, they sell at a reduced price. If the laws are not applied, all the good interventions will fail to achieve intended results.
Yeah, and the best thing is government, after reducing import duties, announced that custom officers have left the road, but they are still there extorting us. This and the Nigerian issue should be addressed so we can feel impact of all interventions.
Artisans recount Nana Akufo-Addo's emphasis on Swami magazine's importance in the 2016 campaign, especially regarding the flagship One District, One Factory policy. They, however, say no such promise has come into fruition yet. They also point to poor roads in the industrial enclave as a challenge to their business. They expect to hear measures to create conducive environment for businesses to thrive.
We want them to tell us the things he has done for us so far. The rest of them should also be captured. Our roads should be captured in the budget. Due to the dusty nature of the roads, our business is not flourishing. The promises made us must be redeemed.
The president made us a promise during the campaign period. We expect him to capture all those in the budget. Those are the expectations.
At the part of Swami they call Matthias, and in here a lot of people sell parts of vehicles, that's spare parts. And as you can see, I'm in the middle of a spare parts shop. Lots of parts surrounds me, vehicle boots, vehicle doors and others. But all these parts have been here for a number of months. Their patrons are saying these parts are very dirty and they look like very old parts, and therefore they are not ready to spend their monies on them. The people here say they are suffering because the road is unfixed, and therefore the dust from the road settle on all these spare parts, making them owed to the patrons. So what they are telling government is to create an enabling environment for them to work so they can get money. Many believe whatever relief that the government gives through the budget is needless unless it creates an enabling environment for them to work. From Kumasi for Joy News, Nana Aljima reporting.
And that's what they expect. But what else can we expect? Let's talk about it. I mean, we've done all the macro and talked about, you know, what is causing the big burden on our expenditure and why our revenue is not living up to expectation. But let's talk about some of the specifics, the specific policies that we expect to make a difference to people. So we've heard about the plans of government to remove the luxury tax. Let's talk about that for a moment, and then we'll pick on other policies. So, William, do you have a 3-litre vehicle?
No, I don't.
You don't?
I don't.
Prudent accountant.
It's there are a number of reasons that the revenue projection for that underperformed. We made a number of assumptions which were not entirely accurate. Whenever you implement or want to implement a tax policy, you should always factor in the fact that people may find alternatives around it. So you come out with a policy that says if you have an engine capacity of 3.0 and above, you are classified as a luxury vehicle, and that you'll be paying minimum 1,000 Ghana cedis whenever you go to renew your roadworthy certificate. I have a number of questions. How do we monitor that people actually have roadworthy certificates? Do we have enough personnel of the MTTD and enough of the device to monitor to ensure that everybody has a genuine roadworthy certificates for these vehicles? What happened and what I have heard is that people found innovative ways to misclassify their vehicles. And that even if it's a 3.0 vehicle, it was misclassified as 2.7, and they paid the roadworthy fee without paying the 1,000 Ghana cedis minimum. And that is why government did not realize its revenue. So we're targeting a higher amount on a lower base, which is only 3.0 and above. I thought that we could have gone about a different way. Government needs revenue, we agree. Can we do 30 Ghana cedis or 20 Ghana cedis on all vehicles? And so that at least we can rake in some revenue. It's better to have 30 Ghana cedis on 1 million or 2 million vehicles than having 1,000 Ghana cedis on a selected amount.
20,000 vehicles.
I think it's a better gamble, if you ask me. And that is why that did not work. And people tell me, William, we had to pack. If you tell me a 3.2-litre pickup is a luxury vehicle, it is quite difficult to swallow. I had a client who walked up and said, if you look at the vehicles that we have, mining support, we have vehicles where we detach the bucket and then we mount up the rods to go and drill. If we look at the cost, we are spending about 100,000 Ghana cedis just on that levy. Remember, that is a business expense. So for corporate income taxes, they will be willing to deduct it and say that I incurred this to generate my income. So even though you are raking the revenue, you are affecting your corporate income taxes. So we did not really think through the policy and its implications on the wider society. And I think that this is a fine opportunity for government to say, we've come back, we've heard the concerns, we've looked at the policy, and we want to rationalize it. Either we are abolishing it or we are making it a lower amount on a broad base. And that is something I expect in the media review of the budget from the Minister of Finance.
Now, Henry, we're learning that that particular tax underperformed by over 85%. Is this vindication to those who said at the time of its introduction in November that government did not think this through?
Thank you. I might not want to profess commenting on it, but I think it also questions our planning process. How do we forecast expected revenue from possible sources, and how do we validate it? What margin of error is permissible within such arrangements? And all these are quite important for us to arrive at tax brackets and tax tools that we use in our policy planning. But I also want to talk about the fact that apart from the luxury vehicle tax, the Ghana Revenue Authority has also been doing other things that I think it is worthy for us to talk about. And I think one of them is what they call the ITAPS. The ITAPS, which is the Integrated Tax Application Proportion System, which basically seeks to put everything on the internet so that you would be able to access your tax clearance certificate, access your withholding tax certificates through the internet. Basically, what this is doing is to eliminate the human factor, where I could, as a tax officer, I can compromise whoever comes to my office and give him or her a rate that is not the right rate. So the ITAPS is something that hopefully should be able to increase the volumes of taxes that people pay. And also the tin itself, I'm sure you agree with me that now if you go to register a business, you are required to have your tin. Yeah. Individuals are being compelled in one way or the other to have the tin. And I think the broad view is that when people are captured within the tax bracket, then you'll be able to track revenues that comes to them. And I think some of these things are worthy steps that the agency has taken, and we need to support them in that direction.
I mean, talking about blocking the holes, William made an important point that, look, the problem is not really domestic revenue. We're doing well there. In fact, often we exceed our targets there. It's customs.
Sure.
And right here in the studio, I spoke to some clearing agents who said that even after the introduction of the paperless system, which, I mean, on paper is the solution, you know, to this whole, all of the leakage at the ports, even after the introduction of that, customs officers are still finding ways. So now, apparently, your container can be stopped, and you have to send mobile money to somebody at compliance before it is moved on in the process. Okay, so clearly, as fast as you can implement laws, that's how fast the criminals will also evolve. What's the plan there? Because it's things like this that would make a budget meaningful and help us meet our targets.
Thank you. I think it is so wrong that as officers within the GRA, your focus is rather trying to defeat the very goal of the agency. I think we need to be very hard on compliance. It is wrong for any officer to be engaging in what you just talked about. But I want to also say that customs in itself, the revenue from customs theoretically is expected to come down because the government is implementing the policy of increasing manufacturing, increasing industrialization of this economy. So what it means is that substitutes are created for hitherto things that we had brought from abroad. So if you look at the numbers,
consider that in setting your targets, haven't you?
Sure, okay. Sure. So I mean, and it comes to the point that in as much as you are building your local economy, trying to reduce importation, that fraction of corruption needs to be kept. And I think the government recently has embarked on some steps trying to shift people around. Like William said, it's a good step, but how do we sustain it? Are we really attacking the problem at the ports? Is it that the cartel within the port system is so strong that we can't break? There are so many questions that we need to ask ourselves and see how we can find solutions to them.
Let's keep on the topic of blocking the loop, the holes and corruption and what it's doing to our budget. I mean, somebody said that just by changing the part of our law that makes it difficult to fire public and civil servants, we could probably end up saving billions per year. I wonder if you agree and whether you have any thoughts on how we need to be blocking these loopholes.
Yes, I think the important aspect of blocking the loopholes, again, is to limit the human interaction.
Yeah.
We've had a number of policies being thrown at that. Are they achieving their purpose? Now, if you ask me about payment of money, till date, we have national health insurance saying that now you can even renew your insurance through mobile money.
Yeah.
Till date. The Ghana Revenue Authority has not fully developed a system where people can pay taxes through mobile money. And so till date, I still have to walk up to a tax office to make payment. And yes, you can pay through SWIFT and then send it, but how many people actually use the banking sector? Apart from mobile money, where we know a lot of artisans and people in the informal sector use. And so we have to double up on our digitization and limiting the human contact. ITAPS is a wonderful idea, but I can tell you my personal difficulty with ITAPS. I wanted to file my returns for last year using ITAP. I couldn't do it. And so in the end, I had to abandon it and walk to my tax office and file it physically. And so these are some of the challenges that come up. If we are building the system, remember a lot of people were accessing it at the time, so I think that there was too much traffic on it, and so the system could not contain it. These are things we should think and then try and improve. If we limit the human interaction, then we'll be able to solve some of these corruption-related issues as far as the leakage is concerned. Because if compliance. If someone at compliance has to sign off before the cargo is actually released or the container is released for it to be inspected, then obviously we may have systems in place where people will try. Of course, I always say, whenever you try to have a system that's efficient, people try to game the system. But we have to come back with stronger measures to be able to deal with that problem. Other than that, we may not be able to meet our revenue targets as we always forecasted, because we do not put in place that margin of corruption that always plagues our systems and institutions in Ghana.
Sure. Let's talk about contractors. Recently, there was some agitation. Contractors went all the way up to the roads ministry and said, look, pay us, you know. Some contractors haven't been paid for 5 years. Sure. Somebody came to see me, brought his documents. This full-grown man, you know, breaking down emotionally in front of me because his business is being destroyed by the government, by his customer, you know. So they owe him, they won't pay. Not just the historical work that he's done, but the new government came along, gave him more work, and they still haven't paid him. Look, I understand we have difficulties, but if somebody issues a contract for work to be done, when they know we can't afford to do the work, should such a person not be prosecuted for, you know, like causing financial loss to the state or whatever? Why give work when you can't pay for it? You know, it's like you call a plumber to your house. You know you can't pay the plumber. Yeah, to give you let him do all the work.
So I think it's all about our contracting process. At what point does the contractor's contract becomes effective? Is it at the point of award at the Ministry of, say, road sector, or is when it has gotten to the Ministry of Finance where there's a commencement certificate issued for the works? That we need to see how we can resolve it. But
I think not clear? Is it not?
So in the past,
William is smiling. I have a feeling
past, yes,
legally it is very clearly defined.
But sometimes you can have MDAs committing the center, in this case the Ministry of Finance, without recourse to how much has been budgeted for in the budget for the sector.
Okay.
And in that sense, what it means is that should you go through the Ministry of Finance, there's a possibility that there will not be a budget line to meet that expenditure.
So the MCA is the one who will prosecute in such an example?
Per what you said, yes.
Okay.
So what it means is that the gift mix, which has been put in place, a beautiful process of checking, you know, payments, will not pick that payment because you don't have commencement certificate and it has not been entered into the system. So if you look at the back of the budget, all the projects that are ongoing within each district is there. Often people don't check some of these things. So you would see him bringing certificates prepared by the district engineer, certifying that indeed work has been done, but you check within the system, within the gift mix system, that project isn't there. So it ends up government assuming that responsibility, which in my opinion shouldn't be accepted because it is not part of the budget. But government assumes it because it's emanating from its own agencies. But because there's no budget line for it, it's not in the gift mix, it becomes difficult to pay.
How pervasive is this? Is this a very widespread practice?
It used to. It used to. So I think now there are a bit of structures in place that is actually limiting, you know, some of these things.
Of the hundreds of contractors who marched on the office that day, what percentage of their problems do you reckon would be caused by this?
I didn't see the people, so I will not be able to.
That's fair enough. But I'm just trying to understand, is this perhaps the most common reason why
much of the
contractors have not been paid?
Much of the arrears in the road sector are due to some of these things.
So why are we not seeing prosecutions? Why are our courts not filled with people who have given out contracts without going through the proper process and creating debt for government?
So that one too. There's an issue between the Ministry of the Attorney General and the Ministry of Justice. There's a huge argument on whether to separate them so that prosecution can be effective. If you have Attorney General who sets off the government and be able to pick on some of these things. Fortunately for us, we have the special prosecutor, and some of us expect that some of these issues will be picked up by the special prosecutor to ensure that there's a speedy delivery of justice to the Ghanaians, well, if there are corruption-related issues in there.
Well, he's been given some 190 million cedis. He's currently working on some ambulance cases, Yarega cases, and so forth, hiring people. So let's hope that this comes within his purview. But William, I mean, this is the age-old corruption issue. Apart from what Henry has described, there's also what happens when those who are fortunate enough to actually get their payments approved, what they also have to go through, where they have to pay 10% to this person and 5% to that person, you know, to get their own money. What is this joke of a system that we're running, where those that we are already paying a salary to do a job are gaming the system, making money out of it, while people are staying hungry at home after doing work for the state?
Well, some have argued that it appears corruption is part of the Ghanaian fabric. I don't know whether that is true or not, but it appears in every system there's a conscious attempt to, as it were, profit, private person's profit, and it's a serious issue that we have to address as a nation. I don't know whether it's just an issue of institutions or it has to be a reorientation of our mindset. I don't know which one it is, or a combination of both. But we need to be able to address that head on. And you hear it from a lot of people who confide in you will tell you that if I don't pay this, I don't get that. If I want to get my own payment, I need to pay this and get that. And you realize that this whole system goes back and comes to bite us, because these contractors go to the banks, financial institutions, to borrow. And they present whatever contracts they have as their basis for which they are giving these facilities. Now they do the work and payment stalls, and it builds up interest on these loans. Sure. These end up becoming non-performing loans in some time. Sure. And when that happens, it affects the credit system in the economy, and then we all suffer. So I always say that it is not just one person that is being kind of like victimized. It has a wider implication on our system and the ability to get credit, because we say that the cost of credit or the lending rates in Ghana are so high. It's because the default rates are so high. And so the question is, why are people defaulting? Because every time before they give you the line of credit, they will make sure you are credit worthy. And the foremost thing the contractors do is that they flag the contracts they have as the basis for the loans they go for. So if, for instance, your friend who walked up to you, or the person walked up to you for 5 years has not been paid, you can imagine the interest that is accruing on the debt he borrowed. Yeah. And you can imagine what the bank will classify that loan as. And so we are not surprised that we have these crises happening to us, and then day in, day out, BOG has to come and either give liquidity support or try to bail out or show up certain banks to keep them afloat. So it's something that affects us in the long run, and we need to be able to, as a people, sit down and think critically of how to resolve this. I don't know how we do it, whether it's strong institutions or reorientation of our mindset, but we need to look at it critically.
Don't we already have laws? I mean, that's the thing. That's where I always get a bit, agitated. Don't we already have laws that say that it is wrong to do some of these things? I mean, and it's not just those who are taking the kickbacks and all of that. But every step through the process, people do the wrong thing. Sure. From the awarding of the contract to the supervision of it, to make sure we're even getting the best work, because that's another drain of the resources. Sure. People come and do poor work, and we have to go and hire someone else to come and do that. So at every stage, we're doing the wrong thing, and it's costing us money. And that wrong thing is wrong because there is a law against which we're acting. Sure. So why is it difficult as a state for us to simply enforce the laws and save ourselves money?
So as long as there's an arbitrage opportunity, individuals will take advantage of it. As long as you have arbitrage opportunity, people will take advantage of it. And I agree with you. The laws must be allowed to operate. You have the PPA Act, a beautiful act that regulates how we conduct contracting in this country. But how do we ensure that it is enforced? Is quite critical, because the arbitrage opportunity exists. And once it exists, and you're a private person, your interest is to maximize your profit.
Yeah.
So you would definitely go for it. And I'm sure you follow the U.S. issue on Donald Trump, taking advantage of the system to enrich himself. So the arbitrage opportunity is there. To what extent does the law, or to what extent is the law applied to ensure that we mitigate the possible impact of the arbitrage opportunity within the system?
I'm starting to see that it's not so much strong institutions, it's strong leaders. We need people who will actually enforce the law, actually do what they're supposed to, and not give in to political or religious considerations when it comes to actually doing the right thing. Now, of course, this is all in the lead up to the media review, which will be read by the Finance Minister in Parliament very soon.